All right, so let's go north for this deep dive. We're talking about Greenland specifically, what the recent buzz around it tells us about, how things are going globally. You sent over 3 articles. Looks like we're about to uncover some seriously interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's fascinating how a seemingly outlandish statement, can spark a conversation about something so much bigger.
Right. So we have this piece from Politico that dives into Trump's foreign policy, especially those comments he made about Greenland. Pretty eyebrow-raising. They've got insights from Michael Froman, who leads the Council on Foreign Relations. He seems to think there might be more to Trump's claims than meets the eye. And then there's this article from the Arctic Institute. They're all about the legal and historical side of things. And they make it clear that Greenland is not just some property up for grabs.
Right.
And lastly, we have an Associated Press piece. It focuses on how Europe is reacting to all of this, compares it to what's happening to Ukraine, and they're worried about what this means for the future of global diplomacy. So, big picture, is Trump serious about Greenland, or is this just political theater? What's really driving his interest? And most importantly, what does all of this reveal about the current state of international relations?
Excellent questions. And I think we also need to consider whether the current international order can, withstand these kinds of power plays.
Yes, definitely. Okay, let's unpack this. This Politico article highlights Foreman's observation that Trump might actually be onto something, even if his approach is, well, a bit unconventional.
Yeah.
Unconventional.
What's crucial here is understanding Trump's pattern of behavior on the global stage, right? Think about his other claims, like taking back the Panama Canal or calling Canada America's 51st state. These pronouncements about Greenland, they aren't isolated incidents. It's all part of a larger strategy.
Right. It's like he's playing a real-life game of Risk, just, casually saying he can just take territories whenever he wants.
Precisely. And I think the question is, what are those strategic goals? What's the end game here? Is he genuinely trying to expand U.S. territory, or is there something else at play?
Right. Maybe he's trying to get a better deal in some other area, or distract everyone from something else entirely. Now, the Arctic Institute article brings a whole new perspective to the table. They dive deep into Greenland's sovereignty, reminding us that it's not simply some piece of real estate that can be bought or sold.
Yeah, you're right. It's not a simple transaction. This situation challenges the very idea that a powerful nation can just dictate the fate of another. Greenland is an autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark, and its people have the right to self-determination, which essentially means they have the right to decide their own political future.
It's like if someone tried to buy your house without even asking you first.
Exactly.
Yeah. And get this. The U.S. actually renounced any claim to Greenland way back in 1916 through a treaty. Then in 1953, Greenland went from being a colony to an integral part of Denmark. So understanding this historical context is crucial, right? Because Trump's rhetoric seems to ignore decades of established international agreements and principles.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not just ancient history either. The article talks about the 2009 Self-Government Act, which gave Greenland even more autonomy, and even mentions a recent draft constitution for an independent Greenland. They're clearly having serious conversations about their future.
Exactly. And the article quotes Prime Minister Mute Ejin saying, Greenland belongs to the people of Greenland, making it clear that they want to be in control of their own destiny. So we've got this complex historical background, and now the question is, why is Greenland suddenly in the spotlight?
Why all this fuss now?
Well, Trump's interest in Greenland actually coincides with its increasing importance on the global stage. We're talking geopolitics, particularly the rivalry between the U.S. and China, and the Arctic is becoming a key area of interest.
Okay, so let's break down this geopolitics thing. We know Greenland is strategically important, but what makes it so valuable? Is it just about location?
Well, location is definitely a major factor. Consider the Greenland-Iceland-UK gap. You might know it as the GIUK gap. It's this narrow passage in the North Atlantic that was a critical choke point during the Cold War. And it's gaining strategic significance again as Russia ramps up its Arctic activity. Whoever controls Greenland essentially has a hand on the faucet for naval traffic in the region.
It's like a maritime doorway that everyone wants to control.
Precisely. Plus, the U.S. has had a military presence at Thule Air Base, now called Patuxent Space Base, since World War II. Greenland is crucial for U.S. surveillance and missile defense in the Arctic. Then there's the economic angle. Greenland is rich in rare earth elements, those things needed for all sorts of technology like smartphones and electric cars.
Right, the stuff that China currently has a tight grip on.
Yeah.
So Greenland could potentially become a major player in that market. It seems like Trump's comments, even if they sounded a little off the cuff, actually point to a whole web of strategic and economic interests.
Exactly. His rhetoric, whether intentional or not, has put these issues front and center on the world stage. So now the question is, how is the rest of the world, especially Europe, reacting to all of this?
While the Associated Press article paints a picture of measured responses from European leaders, some seem to be downplaying the idea of any real military action, almost like they're trying to keep everyone calm.
It's interesting, isn't it? Some officials are basically saying, don't worry, no one's going to invade. But others are expressing genuine concern about what this means for international norms and relations, particularly between the U.S. and Europe. It's a delicate balancing act.
And the article contrasts Trump's comments with what's happening in Ukraine, where the principle of territorial integrity, that countries shouldn't just take land from each other by force, is being fiercely defended against Russia's aggression.
Yeah. It's a stark contrast, wouldn't you say? On the one hand, there's condemnation of Russia for violating international law by taking territory, and on the other hand, there's the suggestion that maybe borders can be redrawn if a powerful country wants it badly enough.
Right. The French Foreign Minister, Jean-Noël Barrot, put it perfectly. He asked, do we think we're entering into a period that sees the return of the law of the strongest? That's a pretty chilling thought, especially considering all the progress we've made in international cooperation. It raises the question, are we returning to a might-makes-right world? Analysts are worried about the potential consequences for U.S.-European relations, the future of NATO, and the entire foundation of the international order that has, for the most part, kept the peace since World War II. And here's the funny part. Greenland's prime minister is actually open to working more closely with the U.S., but he wants it to be based on mutual respect and partnership, not some kind of forceful takeover.
Yeah, it really highlights the fact that Greenland is not looking for a new colonial ruler. They're seeking partners who respect their sovereignty and their right to choose their own path.
So what we're seeing here is a tangled web of motivations and anxieties. Trump's unpredictable style, Greenland's desire to chart its own course, and the whole global power structure shifting beneath our feet. What a mess. Where do we even go from here?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? What does the future hold for Greenland, the Arctic, and international relations? This situation is a stark reminder of just how fragile the international order is, and how crucial it is to defend the principles of sovereignty and self-determination, not just in Greenland, but everywhere. But we've only scratched the surface.
All right, so we're back and ready to go even deeper into this Greenland situation. Last time, we talked about how Trump's comments, well, a bit out there, brought up some serious questions about global power dynamics and Greenland's own aspirations. But now let's get down to brass tacks. What if Trump actually tries to make good on his words?
Well, it's a fascinating question. Let's consider a few scenarios. Outright military force is highly unlikely, not just because it would be a blatant violation of international law, but because it would severely damage the U.S.'s reputation globally.
Yeah, it would basically make the U.S. look like a bully, just throwing its weight around without any regard for the rules.
Exactly. So if military action is off the table, what other options are there? Economic pressure is a possibility. The U.S. could threaten sanctions against Denmark or Greenland, trying to force them into a deal.
That doesn't seem like a great idea, though. Wouldn't sanctions hurt everyone involved? Plus, the people of Greenland have made it clear they're not interested in being bullied.
You're absolutely right. Sanctions would likely backfire, damaging relations and hurting economies on all sides. And let's not forget the human element here. Greenlanders are, proud people with a strong sense of independence. They won't be easily swayed by threats.
So if force and economic pressure are unlikely to work, what's left?
Well, there's always the diplomatic route. The U.S. could engage in good faith negotiations with Denmark and Greenland, exploring areas of mutual benefit and cooperation.
Now that sounds more promising, but what could the U.S. offer that would actually entice Greenland?
Think about Greenland's goals and challenges. They want to become more self-reliant, develop their economy, and provide a good standard of living for their people. The U.S. could offer increased investment in their infrastructure, things like roads, airports, and communication networks. They could also contribute to education and healthcare initiatives.
Yeah, I mean, that would definitely be appealing, especially if it helps Greenland build a stronger foundation for the future.
Absolutely. Another area where the U.S. could provide support is insecurity. With increasing activity from Russia and China in the Arctic, Greenland might welcome security guarantees from a strong ally.
Right, that would make them feel more secure in a region that's becoming increasingly unpredictable. But, and this is a big but, how can the U.S. pursue its interest without stepping on Greenland's toes? How can they ensure they're respecting Greenland's sovereignty and right to choose its own path?
It all comes down to genuine partnership. The U.S. needs to treat Greenland as an equal, not as a subordinate. No more talk of buying or annexing. It has to be a two-way street built on mutual respect and understanding.
So basically, no more acting like a bossy big brother.
Exactly. The U.S. needs to recognize that Greenland has agency and can make its own decisions. They need to engage in meaningful dialogue with both Greenland and Denmark, and that dialogue needs to go beyond just strategic and economic interests. It needs to consider the cultural and social dimensions of the relationship as well.
So show that they genuinely value Greenland's unique culture and history and support their development on their own terms.
Precisely. It's a tall order, especially in today's world, but it's the only path to a truly sustainable partnership. Now, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the role of international organizations and alliances, like NATO. What can they do to ensure countries like Greenland are protected from coercion and that international law is upheld?
It seems like they need to send a strong message that any attempts to violate Greenland's sovereignty will be met with a unified response.
Absolutely. NATO needs to make it crystal clear that an attack on one member is an attack on all, reaffirming their commitment to collective defense. But it can't just be about military defense. They also need to actively promote diplomacy and dialogue, working to de-escalate tensions and prevent conflicts in the Arctic before they even arise.
So be proactive rather than reactive. And I imagine supporting Greenland's efforts to strengthen its own defense capabilities would also be important.
Exactly. A more self-reliant Greenland would be less vulnerable to outside pressure, right? They'd be better equipped to navigate the complexities of the Arctic in the 21st century.
So we need international organizations to be vigilant, but we also need them to shift their mindset away from this winner-take-all mentality.
I agree. We need to embrace a cooperative approach, recognizing that global challenges require global solutions. It's not about one country winning at the expense of another. We're all in this together, and our collective future depends on our ability to work together.
Now that's a message worth spreading. But let's bring this back down to earth for a second. What role can individuals, like our listener, play in all of this? It's easy to feel powerless when we're talking about these huge geopolitical forces.
You'd be surprised how much influence even one person can have. It starts with education, learning about different perspectives, understanding the complexities of these issues. We can all engage in respectful dialogue with each other, even with those who hold different views. We can support organizations that are working to promote peace, justice, and human rights.
And hold our leaders accountable. Right. Make sure they uphold international law and act in a way that reflects our shared values.
Exactly. Remember, even small actions can have a ripple effect. Now let's turn our attention back to Greenland for a moment. We've talked about challenges and potential solutions, but what are the long-term implications of this situation? Greenland seems to be at a crossroads, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. The decisions made in the coming years will have a huge impact, not just on Greenland's future, but on the future of the Arctic and international relations as a whole.
The world is watching, and the stakes are high. But before we jump into the long-term implications, let's take a quick pause.
All right, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Greenland, and its place on the world stage. We've uncovered this really complex web of history, geopolitics, and aspirations. But now let's gaze into the crystal ball, shall we? What might the future hold for Greenland?
That's the question everyone is asking. Remember, Greenland is at a crossroads. The choices they make, in the coming years are going to have a ripple effect, not just on their own future, but on the entire Arctic region and beyond.
Okay, so where do we even begin to untangle all of this?
Well, I think one crucial factor is Greenland's own internal political landscape. The upcoming parliamentary elections are likely to really center on the question of independence.
Oh, wow. Sounds like the people of Greenland have a pretty big decision to make. Will they push for full independence or, stick with their current autonomous status within Denmark? Or maybe try to find some middle ground?
Yeah, it's a decision with huge implications. Some Greenlanders see independence as the key to unlocking their full potential, right? Controlling their own resources, charting their own course, becoming a truly self-determined nation. It's a powerful aspiration, especially for indigenous populations who have often been denied that right.
Yeah, I can see that. It's a story that resonates, far beyond Greenland. But let's be realistic for a second. Are there any concerns about whether Greenland could actually stand on its own 2 feet economically?
You've hit on a major point. Denmark currently provides substantial financial support to Greenland. Some people worry about the economic challenges of going it alone. Could they replace those subsidies? Could they manage the resources effectively?
Yeah.
These are questions that voters will be weighing very carefully.
Yeah, it's like a classic dilemma, balancing the desire for freedom with, the practicalities of economic survival. But it's not just about money, is it? What about Greenland's relationships with the rest of the world? How would an independent Greenland navigate the complex and often treacherous waters of, global politics?
Yeah, you're right. It's a whole new ballgame. Would they align themselves with the U.S. or Europe or maybe even China? Or would they try to forge their own independent path, playing all sides to their advantage? These are all critical questions, and I think the answers are going to have a significant impact on the future of the Arctic, which, as we've discussed, is becoming increasingly important on the world stage.
Yeah, yeah. Speaking of the Arctic, it's no secret that the region is heating up, both literally and figuratively. As climate change melts the ice, it's opening up new shipping routes and access to resources, and that's attracting a lot of attention, from major global players.
The Arctic is no longer this remote and isolated place. It's a geopolitical hotspot. And Greenland, with its strategic location and vast territory, is right in the middle of it all.
So we've got internal political dynamics, the changing Arctic landscape, but we can't forget about the external forces at play here. We've talked about potential U.S. involvement, but what about, China and Russia? They've been making their own moves in the Arctic.
China has been particularly active, investing heavily in infrastructure and resource development as part of their Belt and Road Initiative. They see the Arctic as a key link in their global strategy. They're looking for new shipping routes, access to resources, and they're willing to spend big to get it. Greenland is definitely on their radar.
And then there's Russia, which has a long history in the Arctic and has been, beefing up its military presence in the region. They're not exactly thrilled about NATO expanding its influence in their backyard.
Russia sees the Arctic as vital to their, national security and economic interests. They're determined to assert their dominance and keep NATO at bay. So you can see Greenland is caught in a geopolitical tug of war with major powers pulling in different directions. It's a delicate balancing act for them.
So how can they possibly navigate this complex web of interests and pressures?
Yeah.
It's a bit like walking a tightrope, isn't it?
Exactly. Greenland needs to engage with these external actors, but they need to be smart about it. They can't afford to become overly reliant on any one power. They need to diversify their partnerships, build strong alliances, and always prioritize their own national interests. They also need to be clear and consistent in their messaging to the international community, making sure everyone understands, their aspirations and their limits.
Yeah. That sounds like a tall order, especially for, a relatively small nation. But this situation raises a bigger question for me. Can the current international order, with its rules and institutions, actually withstand these kinds of tensions and competing interests? Or are we heading for a more fragmented and unstable world where, might makes right?
That's the million-dollar question. The current system is definitely under strain. But, that doesn't mean it's doomed. There are things we can do to strengthen it. We need to recommit to multilateralism, working together to address shared challenges. We need to bolster international institutions like the United Nations, empower them to enforce international law effectively. And perhaps most importantly, we need to ditch the zero-sum mentality.
Instead of seeing everything as a competition, we need to recognize that cooperation is the only way forward. We need to understand that global problems require global solutions and that our collective future depends on our ability to work together.
You've hit the nail on the head. The Greenland situation is a microcosm of the larger challenges facing the international community. It highlights the tension between national interests and global cooperation, the fragility of the existing order, and the urgent need for new approaches to global governance.
It's been a fascinating journey exploring Greenland and its place in the world. As we wrap up this deep dive, what are your final thoughts for our listener?
I think the key takeaway is that even seemingly remote places like Greenland connected to global events in profound ways. The situation is it's a wake-up call. It reminds us that we're all interconnected and that the choices we make, both individually and collectively, have consequences. But it's also a story of hope. It shows that even small nations can have a significant impact on the world stage. Through dialogue, diplomacy, and a commitment to shared values, we can build a more just and sustainable future for all.
Well said. This has given us a lot to think about. Thanks for guiding us through this complex and fascinating topic. And to our listener, we hope this deep dive has equipped you with the knowledge and insights you need to navigate this ever-changing world. Until next time, stay curious.